Hello everyone and welcome back to World of Warplanes, and today I have something extremely special for you. I'm actually really excited for this review. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Tier 10 British heavy fighter. It is the Gloucester Javelin. So I'm going to jump right into this one because I'm really excited about it. I have a ridiculous match at the end of this. I surprised myself with what kind of result I could get at the end. So if you would like to skip past my blabbering about the plane, you are free to look at the timestamps and jump to the battle. However, I do recommend listening to it because this is a tricky plane to understand, but it can be pretty rewarding once you do. That's the most generic summary I can give about this aircraft. Is it's difficult to learn, but amazing once mastered. And that pretty much sums up this aircraft in a nutshell. So, the Gloucester Javelin, the Tier 10 British heavy fighter. It comes off of some pretty interesting planes in the line, right? The British heavy line, if you're not familiar, is really the line that's known for having fairly mediocre flight characteristics, but good ordnance layout, so you can do both heavy fighter duties and also ground attack damage. And that is true all the way up until the P228, and then the Javelin changes everything. So the Javelin's a little bit of a departure from the rest of the line. It still has this core blood in it, but it loses the ordnance. This plane does not carry any ordnance. So then what makes the Javelin interesting, right? We all know what the XF90 is. If you've gotten a Tier 10, I feel like the XF90 is probably the most popular Tier 10 heavy fighter, just because it has 620s, right? And it's very fast. It's the fastest plane in the game. So I think that uniqueness really lends people to really gravitate toward the XF90, and for good reason. That's a good aircraft. The ME 262 HG3, that's just a good aircraft all around. And so this Javelin has a lot to live up to, right? There's a lot that this plane has to compete against in order to... It has high standards that it has to compete with, right? So let's take a look. What is the Javelin compared to its competition? And there's only 3 Tier 10 heavy fighters, so it's pretty simple comparison, right? First thing to note is the gun armament, and also note that all of my aircraft are specialized. So the statistics are not going to be what they are at default, but rather the altered statistics based on my equipment. So it might not be a perfect comparison, but I feel like the planes are set up in a very optimal way for each of the aircraft, so it could be a good representation of what the plane could be compared to other aircraft. And just like all of my heavy fighters, I really like to put an emphasis on the effects of the guns. Now, what kind of guns does this thing have? Well, you have 4 of the 30mm Aiden guns, which have 330 damage per second. They have 300 rate of fire, and they have a range of 2,600 feet. So statistically, these guns are decent. Not great. I think if you remember seeing the 1101 review, the damage per second per gun was like 700 for that plane. So technically speaking, it doesn't seem like this is as much, but they're higher caliber guns. They'll cause a lot of critical damage, and the rate of fire is still really good. I don't know exactly how it compared to the 1101. Actually, I'm going to look it up real quick. How does it compare to the 1101, right? Okay, so the damage per second is lower, but the rate of fire is higher. Interesting. Alright, so the Javelin does have higher damage output, I guess, compared to it. I mean, that's what you expect. It's a heavy fighter, right? But yeah, it's not going to fire as fast as the 1101. So I guess keep that in mind. These guns do hit really, really, really hard, and I think understanding the guns is probably going to be the most important aspect of the Javelin, because they're both a blessing and a curse. Um, they're statistically really good guns. Like, they hit really hard. Um, if you look at it, there's not quite as high as the 262 HG3, but it has better range. They have better distance than the HG3. And it's got better damage per second compared to the XF90. So it kind of gets the best of both worlds. And you get 430s, which 30s do a lot of critical damage, right? If you have really any of the higher tiered British aircraft, you should be pretty familiar with these guns. I'm almost positive the P228 also has these guns, so you're not gaining anything new in terms of firepower. The only thing you're losing when you upgrade to the Javelin is your ordnance capability. You no longer have the ground damage capability that the P228 had. Instead, you're just stuck with your guns. And what makes things even worse for this aircraft is where the guns are placed. And if you look at it, let me move these a little bit more. If you look at it, where are these guns located? Well, this is a big aircraft, right? It's a heavy fighter, even compared to, I mean, look at the HG3. It's massive compared to the HG3. XF90, it's massive compared to the XF90. This is a big aircraft, and on top of that, you have the guns that are on, like, way on the edge of the wing frame, right? So if you look at it, these things are, typically you want your guns right in the center, right? But for some reason, the guns are just nowhere near the center. They're way off to the side. And that causes a lot of problems for this aircraft. This plane has a lot of great strengths, but the guns are hit and miss, right? The placement of the guns is really bad, but you have very good guns. What makes this even weirder is the P228 has the same number of guns, but the P228 has all of its guns right in the nose. But for some reason, the Javelin has them way out on the edge. And that's a really big problem for this aircraft. And the reason is that this plane cannot hit targets at close range. It just can't. It's something that you really have to get used to. If you're 500 feet or closer to an opponent, the chances are you're not going to hit your target. If you want to hit your target at close range, you pretty much have to hit them with just 2 of your guns. So instead of aiming at them straight on, you aim off to the side and try to get 2 of your guns to hit, which is the weirdest thing ever. But it's the only way you can hit targets at close range is to get just 2 of your guns to shoot, because these guns, if you can get them to focus, they'll do a lot of damage. But they don't focus until about, like, maybe 1,000 feet out. Like, it's not right up in front of the plane. So I guess another thing that might help you is if you're, like, going against a Javelin, you're getting shot by it. I know it sounds ridiculous, and it doesn't always work. You'll still get obliterated sometimes. But you'll make it kind of awkward for the Javelin if you get right up in their face, because the guns are so far out, they're going to have a hard time hitting you. Just because the guns are getting fired usually on the edge of the Javelin. Well, they're getting fired on the edge of the Javelin, but because the Javelin is so large, sometimes the guns are so far apart that they're actually greater than the wingspan of the plane you're trying to shoot. So literally, if the plane is right in front of you, you cannot hit it. The guns will just hit to the side of the aircraft, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's something that I really wanted to make a point of, because it's one of the weird quirks of this aircraft that on paper seems absurd, and honestly, it's one of the most difficult things to understand when you first start playing this aircraft, because I don't really remember any other aircraft that has such a large profile and having their guns exclusively located on the edges of the wings. And you will notice it when you fly this aircraft. It is a very, very noticeable thing about this aircraft. The guns are good. They are good. I'm not going to say they're not good. but their placement is weird. These guns do have a focus, though. If you get that focus, I think it's like, I don't know, maybe 1,000 feet or something. If you get that focus where those guns are aimed and where they kind of intersect with each other, and you get all 4 of those guns to hit targets, this thing obliterates its opponents. It just melts anything in the game. Like, there's nothing in the game that can withstand this for more than a couple seconds. It will obliterate even specialized bombers with these guns. But you just have to realize you don't want to be close to your target when you're shooting them. You also don't want them to be super far away because, I mean, if you think about it, those guns are essentially making an X in the air, right? So because of their aiming, if they just fired straight, you're never gonna hit your target. So the way that these guns are actually set up is, it's hard to tell, but they're technically calibrated to hit targets at a specific distance. So they're actually pointed not parallel or not perpendicular to the wing, right? Instead, they're a little bit tilted inward toward the nose, and that way at some point they're going to converge and they will hit their opponents very hard. The problem is, after that point, they'll diverge again. So essentially, the gun pattern that this thing will fire at is an X. It can't hit targets at close range, and it really can't hit targets at long range either because of that divergence. You have to find that perfect sweet spot this plane will destroy. If you find that sweet spot, it'll do a lot of damage. But I know I'm harping on it, but it's something that I wanted to talk about because it's something that is very unique about the Javelin, and it's one of the reasons why I ignored this aircraft for so long. Because I'm like, who designed this? And I felt like it was too much of a departure of the P228, and it was very off-putting. However, it's not all bad news, right? These guns do hit very, 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 very hard if you get them to connect. And it's just training yourself to not get too close or too far from your opponent. You have to find that sweet spot where they hit. I want to mention another thing about these guns. It doesn't say it on here, but these 30s are very inaccurate. And I mean very inaccurate. When you first get this aircraft straight out of the gate, you will notice that your shots have a very, very drastic range that they'll hit. Like, their dispersion is ridiculous. They'll just go everywhere. And so I'm mentioning this because if you want to make this plane work, first of all, you can't be off-put by the wing-mounted guns. And secondly, you have to learn how to use them. It's not that they're bad, it's just that they're different. And because of that uniqueness of the aircraft, you have to have patience, you have to have self-control, and you have to learn how to fly this aircraft. It is not a plane for a beginner. If you want a plane, a heavy fighter that's just all around good at tier 10, I feel like the 262 might be the best answer. The XF90 is very good, but the speed is difficult to maintain and control in the XF90. The guns are great on the XF90, but the speed is difficult for newer players to control. The Javelin has good flight characteristics for the most part, but the guns are hard to control. So I personally feel like the 262 HG3 might be the most newer player friendly. Not to say you can't make good use of this aircraft, I'm just saying the guns are tricky. I know I spent just a bunch of time on that, but I think the guns are probably the most interesting part of the Javelin, and it's what makes and breaks this aircraft. If you understand the guns, you understand the plane. And if you understand the guns, you will have a large amount of success in this aircraft. If you don't understand the guns, and you don't like the guns, you will hate this plane a lot. And I think what makes it even more interesting, if you have any other British aircraft at high tiers, for the most part, if you have the Swift, you have the Aidens. If you have the Javelin, you have the Aidens. If you have the Hunter, then you have the Aidens. If you have the P228, then you've used the Aidens. So they're not new guns. They're not unique guns. You understand the guns, but because of their placement, they're weird. And if you have played any planes that have the Aidens, you're gonna know that they can be pretty wonky. They can be pretty weird sometimes. So out of the gate, this plane's a little bit hard, especially since the accuracy is so bad. And just as a hint, that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on specialization, is trying to understand and tame these guns as best we can. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about the next characteristic, and that is, well, I guess we already talked about it. This thing doesn't have any bombs or rockets, right? So, XF90 has 2 bombs, HG3 has 2 bombs. What do you have? You have big guns. That's what you have. And not to say that these guns are bad for ground target damage. In fact, they're actually really, really good against ground targets. They're good against armored targets as well, but really having a couple bombs on your aircraft is amazing to deal with large amounts of armored targets. You don't have that capability. So if you attack soft targets, if you attack those AA mounts, if you attack tents, or simple things like that, you're going to do a lot of damage. These guns will destroy it very easily. I don't recommend solely going for ground targets, but there's a place and there's a time to go after ground targets, and the guns absolutely can go after ground targets when you need them to. I only have 1 bomb marking because it's not the primary focus of the aircraft. If it was one of the more important factors of the aircraft, well, then you'd have some sort of ordnance, and you just don't. So that's that. You don't have bombs or rockets, which I guess might be a good thing. It doesn't really hurt your flight characteristics that way. But anyway, next characteristic, and that is survivability. Oh boy. Survivability. Just take a look at this real quick. 17, 17, 40. Yes, you can combine both of these aircraft and still have more survivability from them. In fact, you could add like another HG3 on this, and you would have like 3 tier 10 heavy fighters worth of HP. That is ridiculous. This thing is an absolute tank, and perhaps the survivability is one of the defining features of the aircraft. Right? We have 700 hit points. Well, I guess okay. 700 hit points, 668 hit points, so I guess you have the hit points of both of them combined. But that's not the only thing that goes into survivability. You also have resistance to damage, which mine is a little bit higher, and your resistance to fire, which is on the higher end, right? Same as the HG3. But the main thing for survivability that puts this thing really high up there is the HP. This is a lot of HP for a heavy fighter. There's no 2 ways to get around that. That is a lot of HP. If the keen-eyed of you can see that I may have boosted it a little bit, but we'll get back to that. There's a lot of hit points on this aircraft. It's one of the strengths of the aircraft, and it's something that you shouldn't overlook. But again, we'll get back to that in a little bit. Moving on, swiftly, is the airspeed. Airspeed, XF90, destroys you. HG3 is a little bit better. So you are actually the slowest, and I don't know if that's just down to my equipment or if it's actually just a little bit slower. I think it might actually be just a little bit slower. But either way, you're pretty comparable to the HG3, which again, you're not slow. You're a heavy fighter. That's fast. But one thing I do want to mention about the airspeed is your size. I know, I'm bringing up the size of the aircraft again. Oh no. But I think the size of the aircraft is just so important to the plane. It controls a lot of aspects about this aircraft, and it defines how you play the aircraft. And therefore, I need to mention it because it's just important. So, what I mean by the size is, alright, if you ever took dynamics, if you ever took physics, you'll know that an object in motion will stay in motion unless acted upon by an equal and opposite force. Thanks, Newton. Why do we need that? Anyway, you know that a plane that's moving doesn't want to stop moving, right? And this is directly correlated to the mass of the aircraft. So you have mass times velocity. So if you're going fast and you're a very big aircraft, you have a lot of momentum. Think of it as a train moving at 30 miles per hour versus a car moving at 60 miles per hour. Even though the car is moving faster, because the train has so much more mass, it has way more momentum. And so it's much, 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 much harder to stop a train than it is to stop a car. And that is the same idea with the Javelin, except it's not really represented in the game. The reason I say that is this thing is very difficult to get up to speed, which physically makes sense because the bigger the mass, the more energy it takes to get that mass up to speed. That's just common knowledge, right? The problem is, once you get up to that speed, it should be able to retain that speed pretty well. That does not happen with this aircraft. You get up to speed and you let go of your boost, and you're going to start bleeding speed very fast. This aircraft struggles in order to maintain airspeed. It bleeds its airspeed a lot. So even though your airspeed rating is good, it's hard to get up to the boost speed. The boost speed of 723, you're not going to attain that quickly, and when you do attain it, you're not going to get there for long. You do have more boost than everything else, so you can boost for longer, but you need that extra boost because it takes you longer to get up to speed in the first place. Another thing to mention, the engine cooldown rate, I did increase it. It doesn't actually tell you what the engine cooldown rate is on here, but I can tell you that the engine cooldown rate is not good on this aircraft. Even though you have 34 seconds, kind of once you use up that boost, it's going to take you an eternity to get even 10 seconds of it back. And that's even noticeable when you use the consumable, where sometimes when you use a consumable on a heavy fighter, you usually get like, I don't know, 15 seconds of boost back. You don't get that on this aircraft. You'll get maybe 10 seconds if you're lucky. And I think that might be one of the bigger hurts of the aircraft. While statistically, your speed is not terrible. In fact, I mean, 723 versus 744, that's not much of a difference, right? The problem is it's just hard to get up to that speed, and it's hard to maintain that speed. You bleed the speed very quickly. That's something that, I don't know, kind of weird, but it's just the way that the plane is. So, anyway, the airspeed is not bad. It's just slow to start up, slow to stop, right? Maneuverability, we have 35, 37, 25. So obviously you're going to be more maneuverable than a XF90, right? XF90 is all about that speed. The Javelin is not all about that speed. It's all about... well, it's not really all about the maneuverability either. I have a turn build on my HG3, which is why I have more maneuverability on the HG3 than I do on the Javelin. So the HG3 actually can turn 360 degrees in a shorter time than a Javelin. So do keep that in mind. The HG3 is actually faster. It has, the Javelin has a very slow rate of roll. I mean, I guess that's based on the size of the aircraft, so that's another downside. You don't worry about rate of roll too much, but rate of roll does have its important uses at times. Minimal optimal speed, that's where this plane is actually pretty good. Obviously, minimal optimal speed is not always a good thing, but it means that you can slow down and these heavy fighters will overshoot you. It's risky because their guns could destroy you, but you can slow down because if you go after bomber flights, especially, this is probably the most noticeable when you go after bomber flights. If you recall, bomber flights move very, 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 very slow for some reason. They're just very slow. And so being able to slow down and not overshoot them is actually a pretty big advantage for this aircraft. Maximum optimal speed, again, it's only 3 lower than the HG3, so it is pretty comparable. Honestly, I think the minimal optimal speed can be very useful in a lot of situations. I mean, the HG3, you'll just overshoot that bomber flight. There's not much you can do. This plane you can stay on the bomber flight's tail, and honestly, you can, for the slower aircraft, you don't have to overshoot them as quickly, so you have more time, more opportunity to destroy them, which actually is a pretty good thing, in my opinion. It just means that if you do choose to lose that speed in order to stay on a target for longer, it just means that you're going to have a harder time gaining that speed back, right? Because this plane, once you lose the airspeed, it's hard to gain that airspeed back. Again, the whole momentum thing, right? So maneuverability, honestly, it's not the worst thing. You're more maneuverable than the XF90. If you're going against an HG3 that has a speed build, you will beat them all the time. Even if you go against a stock HG3, you can probably outturn them if you play your cards right. So this plane does not have the worst maneuverability, but it is a brute. It does struggle to turn. And stall speed, again, it's very low, which actually you can make use of it. It's not as useful as the stat as something else, but it's not bad. And altitude performance, last thing. Holy cow, look at that. The altitude performance is very similar to the XF90. Isn't that so weird? This plane, on paper, has pretty similar flight characteristics than the better of each of these aircraft, right? It's not on the low end of altitude, it has the higher end. It's not on the low end of maneuverability, it's on the higher end. It's not on, well, I guess it's on the lower end of airspeed, but it's not, it's basically the same as the HG3, right? Survivability, it's way higher, and the gun armament is just a smidge lower than the HG3, right? So on paper, this aircraft, statistically, is very competitive. It just has its weird quirks, right? It has its weird quirks with its airspeed, noticeably, where it's not as consistent as the HG3 and the XF90, but it has its benefits. Its guns, not as consistent as the XF90 or HG3, but when they hit, they're very good. And the survivability is just on a whole other level. So anyway, that's the stats of the aircraft. One other quick thing to mention, the guns do overheat not terribly. On this aircraft, they don't overheat very quickly, and they're 30, so they will overheat quickly, but not as quickly as you might expect. And what's even better is they'll cool down almost instantly. So there are perks of these guns. I'm not saying there isn't. It's just different. Not bad, just different. And might be a little bit difficult to learn. So, next, we're going to move on to the equipment. Alright. So how are we going to set this aircraft up, right? That's the million-dollar question right here. And it's something I wasn't fully sure how I wanted to set it up. I didn't want to put a speed build because that's what an XF90 is for. I didn't want to do a maneuverability build because that's what my HG3 is for. So what makes this plane different than the other aircraft? What makes this plane stand out? Two things. The guns. While the guns are a blessing, they can also be a curse, or vice versa. Although they can be a curse, they can also be a blessing. So the guns are very important. That's kind of the key feature of the aircraft. It's why you don't have ordnance. And the second key feature about it is the survivability. You have a ton of hit points. So what I wanted to do with this aircraft is something a little bit unique. While all the heavy fighters can be bomber killers and GA killers, I wanted to turn this thing into an unparalleled bomber killer. Unparalleled bomber killer. And how the heck am I going to do that? Well, first I need to tame the guns. So this first piece of equipment is all about taming the guns. The guns are horribly inaccurate. So, there's a lot of great pieces of equipment that you can choose. Choose the gun sight. Trust me, we're just going to move on. You want the gun sight, your accuracy is trash. Airframe. Again, look at the substats if you wish. I highly recommend these bonus characteristics. try to get these bonus characteristics and try to calibrate this piece of equipment. This is probably one of the most, if not the most important piece of equipment on the aircraft. This will make the Javelin so much more bearable. So, I'm increasing the accuracy by a lot, but my pilot's going to die more frequently, which not a big deal. Bonus characteristics, critical damage, accuracy when firing at moving targets. These are 30 mil guns. They hit and crit a lot. Increasing that crit rate even more is just ludicrous. Also, we want to increase the accuracy against light fighters. If we have to engage them, it's nice to hit them without having to be laser accurate. So 5% increase of accuracy when firing at moving targets is a godsend. Definitely get it. It will help your aircraft a lot. That one, you don't have a choice. You have to put that on there. Secondly, this is where it gets interesting. I already have a maneuverability build on the HG3, so I don't really want to go for that. XF90, I already have an airspeed build on that, so I don't really want to go for that. So really you have two options. First of all, this one might not be terrible. I've never used this piece of equipment, ever. I think it's a waste of space, but I'm curious what the substats are. This could potentially be decent. Let me look at it for just a second here. Enhance. What are the bonus characteristics? Tolerance to damage from AA fire. That's not terrible. So if you really want to increase your tolerance to AA fire, you know what? That's not bad. In fact, maybe at some point I will even come back to this aircraft and try that piece of equipment. Really, I think these are the two pieces of equipment. I never, ever recommend these pieces of equipment. But for this aircraft, trust me on it. Give it a go. You might be surprised. I was surprised. Very surprised, in fact. So I ended up going with this one. You have so much HP, I wanted to increase the HP even further. So the way I have it set up, it gets 20% additional HP, right? 20% on the main, plus an additional 3 from the bonus characteristic. I've also increased the tail's resistance and the wing's resistance to critical damage. This extra HP is great, and honestly, maybe this is the reason why you'd want to choose this piece of equipment over than the reinforced, because HP, increasing the HP is useful in any situation, right? Whereas tolerance to AA fire is only when you're attacking sectors. So it's a lot more specific. If I want to turn this into a bomber killer specifically, then I should... Usually you're going after bombers that are in friendly zones, right? Sometimes they're not, but you're typically going after bombers that are in friendly zones or outside of sectors altogether, like a bomber flight, right? So you just want to be able to take more punishment. Just take more punishment and you're fine. So this is more of a universal bonus, whereas the resistance to AA guns is very situational. So I do recommend this. I guess the other option you could do is aircraft maneuverability, and I would not fault you for that at all, bleh. But it does lower your aircraft HP, which in my opinion is your greatest strength, is your HP, because that HP really sets this aircraft apart. There's no heavy fighter in the game that can compare when it comes to the HP. It is a true tank in the skies. And it's not something that you should be taking lightly, in my opinion. And it's for that reason, I personally feel that you want to go for the aircraft HP. I think other options are plausible, but this is the best. It does lower your roll maneuverability, which I don't really care about. And it does increase the other stuff, which, in my opinion, if you're going after bombers, here's another thing. If I want to turn this into a bomber killer, then this is actually quite beneficial. These bonus characteristics, 10% tails resistance to critical damage and 10% wings resistance to critical damage. That is very nice if I'm going against bombers, because we all know that tail gunners are notorious for doing critical damage. So that helps you in that regard. On to the next one. Engine, we get 2 slots. So we need to choose 2 pieces of equipment out of 4, I believe. Yes. 3. Is it 3? 3 pieces of equipment. Alright. So which one do we not care about? Well, I never go for this. It lowers your aircraft speed, which we already talked about. This aircraft doesn't have amazing airspeed. It's situational. It's hit or miss airspeed, and it's for that reason that I suggest probably not going for that one. So generally, I just say go with lightweight power unit and uprated engine. Personally, I just feel like it's more effective. Although, if you really want to make it into a bomber killer, hey, I'm not going to fault you for doing engine protection, because losing your engine makes it difficult to keep up with your opponents, especially bombers, right? If a bomber takes out your engine, how are you supposed to kill the bomber? It's going to get away from you. So there could be a case to be made with this piece of equipment, and if you really want to go all out on making this a true tank, hey, maybe that's not a bad idea. But I did want to increase the maneuverability just a little bit, and airspeed just a little bit, because it's not bad. Not bad, I guess. I just wanted to make it a little bit better. But I think any combination of these can work. Just do what you think works best. And finally, the last one. Here's where we get some options. And I'm going to try to explain why I think the option I chose is probably your best bet. First of all, your burst length. Sometimes 30 mil guns will overheat very quickly. This is not one of those aircraft. They do overheat quickly, but not as quickly as you may expect. That's important. So it's not as quickly as you may expect. For that reason, I don't want to do that. Additionally, the burst length, increasing the time that it takes before it overheats, the burst length's downside is its firing accuracy. We already determined that this thing has terrible accuracy. You do not want to decrease that accuracy anymore. So personally, even if you really wanted to be able to get that burst length out more, try to not do this piece of equipment. Try not to put burst length on, just because you're going to be hurting your accuracy, and you're going to really start to feel that. You do not want to hurt your accuracy on this aircraft. That will be devastating. So you really have 2 options: gas-operated action or long-range gun barrels. 2 things. First of all, long-range gun barrels, your range is already good. You have 30 mil guns, your range is not terrible. But secondly, we already talked about your firing arc, right? Your guns are pointed in toward the nose of the aircraft, therefore they make an X when they fire. There's a sweet spot where those 2 lines cross, the center of the X. And that center is your sweet spot. That's your Goldilocks spot. Increasing your range isn't going to do anything but change the point of your sweet spot, if that makes any sense. So the sweet spot on where the guns converge will now be different. You're not actually going to make use of that full additional range that you might think you're getting. And when planes are that far out, you have to give so much lead in order to hit them. And there's so much time that it takes between the shots being fired from the guns to the time that it hits the target. The only time that I would suggest doing long-range gun barrels is because of going after bombers. The only reason you would want to do that is to make your guns fire so far away that the bomber's tail gunner can't hit you. But that can't happen at Tier 10, because specialized Tier 10 bombers will hit you at 4,200 feet. So I don't think you're going to be getting more than 4,200 feet of range on your main guns. Therefore, that's a waste of time. Do not get the long-range gun barrels. That is a definite no-go. I guess you could go for reinforced bolt carriers if you really wanted the burst length, especially since I see the gas operated action also decreases your accuracy. Personally, I'm going to go with the gas operated action, and the reasoning is simple. These guns are the defining feature. You put out a lot of damage in a short amount of time. Increasing that even further just is amazing. Additionally, even if you lower the accuracy in this case, it's not going to be as big of a deal because you're firing out more shots, right? So even if some are less accurate, you're firing out more shots to compensate. Furthermore, at tier 10, you only have a brief moment to engage an opponent before they'll zigzag away and you won't be able to shoot them anymore. Usually the engagements at tier 10 are lightning fast. You have a split second to decide where they're going and a split second to pull the trigger. It doesn't leave you much room for error. And so increasing that rate of fire just allows you to put more shots into the air in the general space of the target in a shorter amount of time, which gives you a greater chance of killing the target before it no longer is able to be shot. So really, I think gas operated action is very powerful on this aircraft. Finally, we're going to be taking a look at the consumables. This is kind of the standard layout. Do field med kit because the other stuff is garbage. Don't ever use this stuff unless you're doing 4th of July, which, hey, maybe I'll do. Or fire extinguisher. Don't do fire extinguisher. You've already reduced the amount of fires that you're going to be taking from your other stuff. It's better to just heal your pilot. Here, I know a lot of people go for emergency control system to repair their wings. We've already reduced the amount of wings that are going to get destroyed from our equipment. And secondly, this is just better. So it increases your maneuverability. But Slaughter, why would I want to increase my maneuverability when I'm a heavy fighter? Ooh, good question. Several reasons. You are not using this. First of all, you are not using this piece of equipment in order to outturn light fighters. You are not using this equipment to outturn multi-rolls. There is a very specific reason you are using this. 1, to outturn a heavy fighter. 2, to outturn a human-controlled heavy fighter. 3, to get onto a heavy fighter's tail faster so that you can go on to something else quicker. Or 4, to get onto a bomber's tail faster so you're not getting shot by multiple tail gunners at the same time. Use this not so much as turn fighting light fighters or multi-rolls, and you're not using it in order to dogfight in a turn engagement with really anything. That's not the point of this piece of equipment. The point of this piece of equipment is simply to reduce your turning circle in key moments where you need to destroy a target quickly. That's it. So it's great if you need to get on the tails of a bomber faster, and it's great if you need to take down a heavy fighter. That's really the main purpose of this control assist, and for that reason, I'm almost just never, ever, 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 ever use anything but this piece of equipment on any of your aircraft. Any of your aircraft. Because this is, even though you're not necessarily using it for a turn fight, it has applications outside of a strict turning engagement. And it's the most useful. If your tail wing gets destroyed, tough luck. Just try to survive. But ultimately, you'll find that you'll get more use out of the pneumatic control assist. Alright, for the engine consumables, well, it's up to you. Personally, I like engine cooling. I feel like that's a required one. If you really hate your engine getting knocked out, and honestly, I kind of recommend doing it for this aircraft, because if you're going and engaging a bomber and it knocks out your engine, that's a problem. You need to have your engine back up quickly in order to continue to take out the bomber. So I do suggest that you actually do want to put this on your plane. I know I don't say that very often. This, I don't think it's the right pick for this aircraft. I really don't. You can use it, but your engine will get knocked out more often than you think in this aircraft. And I just feel like the battle for manual engine restart is good. And of course, universal ammunition. For the pilot, I guess if you're doing premium ammunition, do the one that increases your critical damage, because this thing already has ridiculous critical damage. That would be even funnier. Don't do the fire. Fire is good for 50 cals. Alright, and for the pilot, here, this is a no-brainer. You have to do Marksman 1. You have to do Marksman 2. Those should be your number 1 and number 2 priority skills. Your first 5 points have to go into these because the accuracy on these guns depend upon it. You have to do it. There's no choice. You have to do that. Secondly, after you do that, you could go for Engine Guru, but I don't recommend it. I feel like the next one you really want to go for is Resilience. That's probably your next best bet, because if you get down to 30% health, then you're going to get a lot of bonuses, and all your critical damage, if you have a dead pilot, that's going to get healed. And it's pivotal in those moments where you have to kill bombers, and you know how when you're going after bombers, they do a ton of critical damage. So if you drop below that threshold, you'll get a second chance to deal with them. So it's like an extra bit of field med kits and engine restarters and stuff. And I think it's just a useful skill to have. Engine Guru is pretty good after that, though. You probably do want to go for Engine Guru after that. And then from there, you could probably go with Engine Guru 2. Not a bad choice. Probably not the choice I would do. You could also do these, but we didn't really focus on maneuverability equipment, so probably not the aerodynamics expert because we didn't go for a full turn build, so you're not going to get as much use out of it. Aerobatics expert is a good one. You could go for that one. And alternatively, maybe Adrenaline Rush. Adrenaline Rush would be pretty good, just because it reduces your weapon overheating by 25% and increases your fire and accuracy by 10% after destroying an enemy aircraft. And it's effective for 10 seconds. And I don't know, that seems like a good one to have. I don't use it very often, but I think this plane would be a pretty good one to have. Obviously, don't use these two, but yeah, that's pretty much this aircraft in a nutshell. So, that was exciting, wasn't it? There's a lot to this aircraft. I do apologize that the videos are going to run longer, but there's a lot to go over, and this is a very complicated aircraft, not for new players, not for the faint of heart, and it takes a lot of skill in order to master this aircraft, in my opinion. Without further ado, I want to show you what can a Javelin really do, because frankly, I don't see Javelins very often, and when I do, I'm not usually very scared of them. But what can a Javelin do if set up properly and in the right hands? Well, let's go see. And here is the battle. This is the one that I was waiting to show you guys. I had this battle and I could not contain my excitement. So glad that I recorded it because it's an amazing battle. And it really, really showcases what this aircraft is all about. It's not like the other heavy fighters in a lot of ways. It's kind of inferior to them in many ways. But it doesn't mean it's a bad aircraft, and if you set it up properly and do what it's supposed to do, there's nothing in the game that can compare with this aircraft. The damage capabilities of this aircraft is just ludicrous. Look at this J287. It's a little bit tricky to hit him at long range, but I mean, look at that. You just melted the crap out of that thing. That's a tier 9 bomber. We just melted him. J7, look, it's a little bit tricky. We're getting close. We really cannot stay on his tail, and it's a little bit tricky to get him. But that's okay. We're going to come over here. See if we can get him, and see how I didn't turn and just engage him? I just kept moving on, right? And that's what you want to do. J7's never going to keep up with me. It's such a slow aircraft. Just zip away from him, turn around, pop him when you get a chance, and oh, look at that. He got away from us again. And you will have that. If you're a heavy fighter, it's going to happen. There's not much you can do about it. You're going to have the situations. But you'll have them less frequently if you know where to aim. Really take the time to learn these guns, because I know this is a weird aircraft. It's very strange, very unorthodox. But look at that. Look at that. I can tell you for a fact the other heavy fighters would not do that so consistently. Once you really hone in on the accuracy of this aircraft, once you really hone into the benefits of this aircraft, the capabilities of this thing is just insane. In fact, you know, I have to admit, when I first got this aircraft and took it out for battle, I thought it was an absolutely terrible aircraft. Terrible. And it's for that reason that I only played my HD3 and only played the XF90 because they were just fun, and I didn't want to deal with this aircraft. I'm like, what does this plane have to offer? Like, why would I fly the Javelin? Why would I fly the Javelin? If you're like that, I implore you, and you have a Javelin that's in your hangar, I implore you, pull it out of the hangar, specialize it, learn the aircraft, set it up, and you might just be surprised. You might just be surprised. I was certainly surprised, and honestly, I think I might have this be my favorite Tier 10 heavy fighter. I'm not even saying that. The XF90 is fun, don't get me wrong. I have a lot of fun playing the XF90. I also really enjoy the HG3. But there's just something about the Javelin that just makes me smile every time I fly it. And that's something that I genuinely did not expect when I first started flying it. It's also for that reason that I really want to try. Look at this XF90. Yeah. It's a human, right? But the XF90, it's for speed, not maneuverability. He tried to maneuver, so he died. Even if he did try to get away from speed, I probably could have kept up with him. But anyway, I digress. This aircraft, if it's sitting in your garage, try taking it out. You might just be surprised. It is a true bomber killer. And honestly, the damage output of these guns is really good. You can't hit them at close range. It's difficult to hit things at close range, but this mid-range is where it's perfect. You hit mid-range and you just obliterate everything. Look at that. Just, they cannot stand a chance. And okay, that's why we have an engine restarter, because it's just important. Our tail is also destroyed, so I mean, you're not immune to that. But look at that. The HP, again, I want to focus on the HP right there. We had a J7 on our tail, right? How many planes can survive taking 1,000 damage from a J7 and not be dead? There's very few that can, other than bombers, and this is one of them. I really like the HP build. I didn't know how I would like it, and I thought maybe I'd swap it out. But the HP has actually saved me in more situations than I can count. It's really good for going against human bombers too, because I don't care how good your tail gunner is, you're going to have a hard time taking off 1,500 hit points from a Javelin. It's going to take you some time without some help. Without some assistance, you are going to struggle to take that out. And with with the amount of boost that this plane has, you can keep up with the bomber pretty reasonably. Look at that, just so casual, you know. It is tricky to hit things at close range. So if you look at that HG3, it was like the two side guns were the ones that actually hit him, not the other guns, and I kind of had to aim it like that. I did get lucky though, because all of my shots pretty much hit and wiped him out. I thought I was not going to quite get him that time, but I did. So now we are moving on, and I don't like sticking on targets. This is one of those aircraft that if you don't quite kill the plane, you really want to just cut your losses and move on. XF90 was mad about us. I mean, we did overextend, so we can't complain about that. We're about to lose our command center. Oh no, not the command center. But we are still vastly ahead on points, so I'm really not worried about it. Really, I'm just having fun farming points, and that's kind of what I'm just focusing on. They have an XF90 and they had something else, but neither one of them are all that impressive right now. You know, they're just kind of they're there, but they're really just fodder. Is how I'm looking at them. Uh, uh, you'd be surprised at some of the engagements that I've won in this aircraft. Like, it's surprising. Like, I go into an engagement, I'm like, I'm not gonna win this. There's no way. And then I come out and I win. I'm like, how did I just win that? Like, are you joking? This plane, this plane has stuff, you know. I mean, you can see right now, it does have airspeed. I'm not saying it doesn't, but look at that. If you don't have, if you're too close to an opponent, you're just gonna have a hard time hitting it. That was a perfect example of that. Squall line is here. I really want to try to squall as many as I can right now. That's probably the most important thing at the moment. So we're gonna use some boost to try to keep up with him. And you know, our engine isn't great, but compared to like multi-role fighters, compared to some of the light fighters, you know, we can keep up with them. We might not be as good as a heavy fighter in some situations, but like, it's respectable. It's respectable airspeed. Maybe not amazing, but it's respectable. Here's a Swift. He's specialized, and not specialized anymore. Goodbye, buddy. XF90 is also distracted. This is a perfect opportunity. Let's take out this other human. He went head on with us. Oh man, dude. That was not your brightest moment, was it? We just got ace there. We're at 21,000 personal points. They almost have supremacy on us. We just have one sector. But I'm going around squalling them as fast as I can. Maybe I should have protected it. We have bombers dropping bombs on our airfield. We cannot lose the airfield or we will lose this game. We wipe him out. We're down to 22,000 or up to 22,800 personal points. Attack the bomber flight. I'm not going to stick on it because it's already dropped its bombs, but I figured I'd get just a little bit of extra damage. Oh, I guess I will turn on it. Maybe a little bit of a mistake, but I mean, the damage output on those. I didn't actually kill the bomber there. I might not have attacked the one that was already damaged because I feel like I should have killed him, but regardless, it doesn't really matter. The main thing is I noticed that if we lose the airfield, it's game over. So I really, really, really need to make sure the enemy aircraft cannot take our airfield. That is the #1 priority. We lose the airfield, we lose the game. Going after the Seahawk, I mean, just look at the damage output. I know the XF90 can do stuff like that too, but I don't think it can kill it as fast or as consistently. Because this thing has a little bit of maneuverability more than the XF90, has very good airspeed, and the guns are just, they're good. They're weird, but with, I mean, 27,000 personal points. Once you understand the guns, like, you can start doing things like this. You can start doing things that are bananas at tier 10. Like, oh my word. When was the last time I saw someone get 27,000 personal points at tier 10? At tier 10! Oh man, what a glorious battle. Like, it had everything, right? You had humans, you had bomber killing, you had other plane killing, you had human heavy fighters that you're engaging. I mean, this thing just, it does work that I did not expect it to be able to do. 24 aircraft destroyed, 15,000, nearly 15,500 damage to aerial targets, 37 critical hits. Yeah, that is nutty. That is nutty. Look at all that critical damage. Oh my word. Yeah, this plane, man, they're really impressed by it. Way, way, way more than I expected. Kazibdub, Winged Legend, Ace, all the fun stuff. Hero of the Sky. Tons of credits. So anyway, with that being said, I would love to thank you guys for watching this brief review. I know it was a bit longer, difficult plane to analyze and review, but I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I really hope you guys learned something, and I really hope you guys are inspired to give this beautiful aircraft a try. Something I never thought I'd say. I never thought I was going to like this aircraft. But here I am, loving this aircraft and recommending it for some honest to heart, just fun in this point. Some great paint schemes just because I wanted to show them. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. I love to read them. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, as that would mean a lot to me to see the subscriptions. I'm trying to get this channel kick-started again, trying to come back into it. So yeah, if you did that, I'd really appreciate it. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Take care, everyone.